and welcome to Race to the White House, our daily show where we get you the latest on the 2024 US presidential election. On today's show, we tell you how Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are running from pillar to post in the final 2 days of election campaigning. Also on the show, we tell you how a non-citizen's vote in the US election has exposed a big loophole in America's electoral system. All of this and much more, so let's get started. With less than 48 hours to go until election day, America's on the edge as the race for the White House comes down to the wire. Polls across the country are showing a virtual tie, with both candidates locked in a dead heat that could lead to one of the closest races in recent history. Millions of voters have already cast their ballots, but the final push could decide who takes the White House. Now, national polling reveals a razor-thin margin. Both Trump and Harris are capturing nearly equal support across key battleground states. Both candidates are crisscrossing the country in a last-ditch effort to win over undecided voters, many of whom are concentrated in critical states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona. For instance, Donald Trump was back on the campaign trail today with a high-energy rally in Pennsylvania. This is the state that he has made central to his strategy to retake the White House. Trump, who narrowly lost the Keystone State in the last election, is working hard to bring back blue-collar voters. Trump is emphasizing his familiar promises of economic resurgence, job growth, and a crackdown on foreign trade deals. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is rallying in Michigan, urging voters to focus on a more inclusive America. Her message centered on unity, promising investments in education, climate policy, and healthcare reform. Both campaigns are fighting tooth and nail for those few undecided voters. At this point, every single vote in the battleground states could be the difference between a win and a loss. Meanwhile, more than 75 million anxious voters have already cast their ballots in early voting. The numbers have set a tone for enthusiasm for both the parties. So with hardly 2 days remaining, both Trump and Harris are racing against the clock, knowing that every rally, every handshake, and every undecided vote matters more than ever. Now, for more on this, we are joined by our White House correspondent, Rohit Sharma from Washington, D.C. Rohit, could you tell us what is it like one day before the election? Who exactly is leading?
Well, it is very, very, very close election as we've been covering this for Race for the White House on India Today Global. We've covered the length and breadth of this election like nobody else. And I can tell you, we never thought it will be this close. You look, we are right now standing in front of the Capitol Hill, where behind me they're building a stage for its next president. But we still do not know who is going to become the next president of the United States. The polls, as you were stating, are very close again, but Donald Trump does have a slight lead in all the polls that came today. One thing is clear, that Donald Trump has not really polled as well as it's showing in some of these polls. Also add to the fact that there is a silent majority factor when it comes to Donald Trump and his presidency and his election. So there are a lot of voters who have not been reached out to by the pollsters. The pollsters are saying that there are a lot of white American voters who have not responded to their calls, and they're assumed to be Donald Trump voters. And that is why the Donald Trump campaign feels very confident of winning this election.
Rohit, thanks for that. Could you also tell us what Kamala Harris is doing in this last days before the election to regain momentum?
Look, Kamala Harris is crisscrossing all the swing states again. She is going to be in Pennsylvania, Georgia. She's also making a pitch in Michigan. Her surrogates are going to all the crucial swing states. They still think they can flip North Carolina. President Biden, himself was trying to attend some of those virtual rallies, and President Obama was in North Carolina. So I think they think that they have a path. They have a very narrow path, but they believe that if they can keep Michigan, if they can keep Pennsylvania, she might become the next president of the United States. But it's very, very difficult. It's very, very close for her, and they are not leaving any stone unturned. But from the looks of it, from speaking with people on the ground, for looking at the momentum that we are looking on the ground, it seems like Donald Trump is leading, and I think the Kamala Harris campaign has acknowledged that. Not so much publicly, but in private.
Well, also with the race this close, what do you think could be a deciding factor this close to election day?
Well, look, the voter turnout. The voter turnout will decide who's going to win the election. A lot of people, close to probably 70 million people, would have cast their ballots by tomorrow morning, and a lot of people will show up. And I think whichever base comes out to vote, be Democratic or Republican, especially in those swing states, is going to decide who becomes the next president of the United States. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have seen, Kamala Harris making sure that a lot of people, her volunteers actually go to the swing states to get the vote and motivate more people to go and vote in this election cycle. They're learning lessons from Hillary Clinton's infamous campaign in 2016, when they did not even motivate voters and people did not show up assuming that she was going to win. So they're playing, they've learned from that playbook, and they're ensuring that they try to get as many as voters out to vote. Now, it all depends on which base turns out to vote. It is also important to know that there are certain states in which they're predicting rain, and whenever it rains, per study, it shows that if the weather is gloomy, Democrats do not show up and vote. So a lot of other factors will also play. And this is fall; it's getting chillier, it's getting colder, so it is definitely getting gloomier. But the fact is, if people believe in their candidate, they show up, and I think that's what Kamala Harris and her campaign is hoping for on Tuesday, November 5th.
Right, Rohit, thank you for that. Moving on. Now, in a surprising twist just days before election day, a Danish citizen has come forward with a shocking claim. He says that he successfully cast a vote in the US presidential election, and it wasn't by accident. Now, the incident has triggered concerns as this shows a gap in the world's oldest democracy, which leaves it vulnerable to potential manipulation. So this problem revolves around voter identification requirements that vary across states. A vast disparity has been observed within voter ID requirements. While some states struggle with photo IDs, others do not even require one to gain access to the polls. Now, this was brought to the fore when a Danish user on X made a sarcastic post. The X user from Denmark shared a picture of a ballot paper with their vote marked for Donald Trump. The user wrote alongside the picture that America doesn't require voter ID, so he decided to vote while he's on vacation in the States. Although he did mention that for legal purposes, this was a joke. But the Danish citizen subtly emphasized this massive loophole in the US election system, given that some states do not require any ID from citizens before casting their vote. Currently, around 30 states in the United States require some form of ID for voters to cast a ballot, but the specifics vary widely from state to state. Now, the states have been divided into three categories of voter ID requirements. One category includes strict photo ID states, where voters must present specific forms of photo identification to vote. This is followed by non-photo ID states, where voters are asked for photo ID. However, they can usually provide an alternative form of identification. The last one is no ID required states, where voters do not need to present any form of ID to vote. According to the Center for Democracy and Civil Engagement, more than 21 million Americans lack a valid photo ID. Many of these individuals are elderly, low income, or come from communities of color. These groups are more likely to face challenges getting an ID due to costs or bureaucratic obstacles. Supporters of strict ID laws argue that they're essential to protect against voter fraud. But in states with little or no ID requirement, critics worry about the increased risk of double voting. The US election system relies heavily on trust, but when states operate under such vastly different rules, it creates gaps. And those gaps can be exploited by bad actors, and it raises legitimate concerns about the security of the elections as a whole. So, could a national voter ID requirement be the answer, or would it unfairly limit access to the ballot? Without a unified system, the loophole created by varying ID requirements is leaving the American electoral system wide open for manipulation. Now, in an India Today Global exclusive, we're taking you straight to the heart of the Democratic campaign trail in Pennsylvania. Our team has been granted exclusive access inside Kamala Harris's campaign bus, and our correspondent Rohit Sharma brings you an inside look at how the Harris camp is making her case to Pennsylvanians in the final stretch.
The US elections are only days away, and the Indian Americans are taking a very important role in making sure their voices are heard in this election. Now, behind me, as you can see, is a bus. This is a bus that's actually traveling from Washington, D.C. to Pennsylvania, a very important state that will possibly decide who gets to become the next president of the United States. And the bus is basically going to be having all the volunteers of Indian origin, of South Asian voters. These volunteers who are pooling in from states like New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C. are all concentrating their efforts to make sure that they can knock on the doors in Pennsylvania, mobilize more volunteers, and campaign with elected officials in Pennsylvania to make sure that Kamala Harris becomes the next president of the United States. We're currently in the bus that is taking us to Pennsylvania now. We have this exclusive event that we are covering with the Indian American voters, and it is going to be a big event in Pennsylvania. A lot of people are converging there because they know how important Pennsylvania is. 19 electoral college votes from the state of Pennsylvania, and these volunteers and voters believe that that they can actually convince some of those independent voters that will end up deciding who gets to the White House. So throughout the entire day, we'll be traveling in this bus. As you can see, we will be talking to
some of the volunteers and voters, asking them their opinion about what they will be doing in their capacity to make sure that they could convince some of these independent voters to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris.
Right now they're distributing some pamphlets this is one of those things that they do when they want to, campaigning. I think the information that has, what they're going to be doing throughout the day, who they'll be talking to, how they'll be canvassing. That's all the stuff that's in this template. And we'll try to get hold of one of those pamphlets when it comes to us and see what's written in there.
Every person has been handed out this document that talks about know before canvassing, and it talks about how you should engage a voter. You can talk like a regular person. Don't feel like you're reading from a script. Don't try to be pushy, and then it also goes on to detail as to things you should say, you shouldn't say, and do's and don'ts. And if we're saying something, how do you respond to it? What kind of conversations you should ideally be having with a voter. So very comprehensive guide. This will be used by all the volunteers on this bus when they go out and when they campaign, uh, knock on the doors and try to speak to the voters today. So everybody's been given this two-page sort of a cheat sheet, if you want to call it, before they go out and start canvassing for Kamala Harris. Dr. Vinita, thank you so much for doing this. First things first, uh, this is a very, very close campaign. We could probably understand that that's the reason why people are heading to Pennsylvania. Uh, just tell us about, how did this idea about taking South Asians to Pennsylvania come about, and your organization and what you've been doing up till now.
So yes, it is very close. So every vote matters, and as you know, the swing states, how the electoral college works here. The states kind of decide who the president is. So I live in Maryland, right? So I vote, but I feel like I have to do work in the swing states, right? Mobilize people because their say is going to determine who is going to be the president for all of us. So that is one thing, right? So every vote matters, and South Asian communities sometimes, um, they don't come out and vote, right? So the one thing is, how do we get them out to vote? How do we inspire them, right? I'm a first generation immigrant here, right? So sometimes we are more connected with Indian politics than politics here. So then helping them understand, answering them from South Asian to South Asian is like it matters to us here. It matters to our children, the reproductive rights, the freedom, the basic democracy, right? Those things matter.
And what issues are important to Indian Americans in this election? Like, why would I mean, there are multiple reasons, but what issues, in the sense, like, why would somebody choose her over President Trump?
So issues that are important to South Asian community that I'm hearing is immigration is an issue, economic, of course, right, and women's freedom is important. In India, we had in 1975, especially for first generation Indians here, is in 1975 we had a medical termination of pregnancy act, and we are still struggling in US. It's very hard for the first generations to understand why we are not even have what we had in the 1975s. So I think reproductive rights is very important. Race issues are important. They might not come as bluntly, but there's an underlying issue that we feel in jobs, we feel in leadership positions where we are judged more harshly than our white counterparts and male counterparts, right? So I think some of the key issues, I would say, immigration, taxes, women's rights, and basic democracy. So these are some of the important issues.
So right now we've arrived at our first campaign stop here in Pennsylvania. Behind me, you guys can probably see this. There are signs of, which it says "They says decide" right here. I mean, and we're just about to get into this place where you probably would be able to see a lot of people gathering right now. We've got these T-shirts that say "Lotus for POTUS," which is something that was designed not too long ago. So we are currently
So it is a very, very hot a topic here, which is, will Kamala Harris win the Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania? And Indian Americans are doing their part right now in making sure that they can do whatever they can to make sure that they elect Vice President Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States. This is Rohit Sharma for India Today.
And now it's time to talk numbers. With less than 48 hours remaining for the US presidential polls, the race for the White House is almost at the finish line. Both Harris and Trump are at a neck-to-neck battle in the key battleground states. So let's take a look at how the presidential contenders are doing in the polls today. According to the New York Times Siena poll, Harris is leading in the national polls with a 49% approval rating, while Trump is trailing at 48%. In the swing state of Wisconsin, Harris is maintaining a lead at 49%, while Trump is at 48%. And in the state of Michigan, both Harris and Trump are locked in at 48%. In the state of Nevada, both Harris and Trump are locked in at 48% as well. And in the state of Arizona, Trump has taken a lead of 50%, while Harris is now at 46%. And in the crucial state of Pennsylvania, Trump has taken a lead with 49% of support, while Harris is at 48%. And finally, in the state of Georgia, Trump is leading with 49%, while Harris is at 48%. The tightly contested landscape means the race remains highly uncertain as the campaign enters its final hours. And now it's time to get you some quick updates from the election battleground that you might have missed. Donald Trump has recently hinted that he might consider restricting certain vaccines if he wins in the impending presidential election. This comes as Trump has said that he is open to some of RFK Jr.'s controversial ideas. This includes imposing a ban on fluoride in US water systems. Now, Kennedy ran for the presidency as an independent in this year's election cycle before he dropped his bid and endorsed Trump. Moving on, US House Speaker Mike Johnson is set to spend election eve campaigning for the Republican Party in Virginia. The Speaker will host events for Republican Derek Anderson, who's running for an open seat. The Grand Old Party has a good chance of winning as incumbent Democratic Representative Abigail Spanberger is not seeking re-election. Spanberger is instead opting to run for Virginia governor in 2025. And finally, Kamala Harris's surprise appearance on Saturday Night Live infuriated viewers who called it a dupe of Trump's skit from 2015. The vice president was seen talking to herself as Mary Rudolph dressed as Harris for the cold open. The two played mirror images of each other as they talked about the campaign events. However, the eerie similarity between Harris's skit and Trump's 2015 appearance did not escape from viewers' eyes. Harris's act resulted in massive backlash from the viewers, who called it a copied act. So that's all we have for you in this edition of Race for the White House. See you again tomorrow.